Hey guys, I'm Dave and welcome to the Trull Gallery. Today we're going to make a custom wall treatment for one of my clients. Over the last several months I've made this wall treatment and this wall treatment, and now I have one more. And I was thinking that if I'm making all these wall treatments, maybe some of you guys would like to do that as well, but you're not real sure how. I'm going to take you through my process. It's fairly simple, the materials are reasonably priced, and with a little planning, even the installation can go fairly smoothly. Let's take a look. Like most of my projects, this one started with a drawing. We went back and forth with the design until we found one that my client really liked. It'll frame out her room without being too busy. We initially thought about using 1-inch wide, 1/4 inch thick MDF strips, but thought that might be a bit boring for this project. Instead, we picked up a few 8-foot strips of 1.25 inch wide by 3/8 of an inch thick molding from the big box store. All of the strips were given a coat of primer on the back and set aside to dry. I came back later that afternoon and gave the show face a coat of primer as well. And I made sure to spray from both sides of the trim to get good coverage on the profile. Between the coats of primer and paint on the molding, I went to my client's home to prepare the walls. This rarely happens in my life. They had pulled off the wallpaper, cleaned up the walls, primed them, and even took off the outlet and switch plates for me. They even put down drop cloths. Everywhere! By the end of day one, the walls and most of the trim had got their first coat. We're going for a total immersion, so everything in the room is going to be the same color, but we use 2 different sheens. The walls will be eggshell, and the trim, doors, and wall treatments will be all semi-gloss. I've never painted a room like that, so we'll see how it comes out together. Between painting the walls and trim, I gave the molding 2 coats of paint. This might be a good time to mention the paint I'm using. While I generally use a mid to high-end paint from Benjamin Moore, my client asked me to use Faro and Ball. While this stuff may be a bit expensive, it rolls, brushes, and sprays well, and it goes a long way. I figured I'd need about 3 gallons of regular paint for the walls, but this stuff covers so well I got 2 coats with just about 1.5 gallons. I let the paint dry overnight and started cutting the molding to size. I set my miter saw to 45 degrees and cut the end of a piece, slid it down to a stop, and cut each strip a bit oversized. This gave me 1 miter on each end of my pieces. I reset my stop, cut the next length, and so on. There are 3 known sizes for this project, and the rest of the stock was cut with just 1 miter and left full length for now. I reset the miter to the opposite side and cut the molding to length. Make sure your blade stops before lifting it off each cut, especially when you have really short offcuts. If you don't, the blade can catch the offcut and bad things can happen. You can see here how the offcut jumps around after the cut. Once all 3 known dimensions were cut, it was time for the installation. To begin, I set my line laser on a pole and set the height for the top of the door frames, which looked to be all the same height. Well, except for the sliding doors, which were actually a couple of inches shorter. We decided to go with the regular door frame height since the curtains will hide the discrepancy on this wall. Our design had a 9-inch space between corners or doors, so I made a spacer with a small handle to keep things lined up. Each piece of molding got a light bead of construction adhesive, and then the trim was set in place against the spacer and along the laser line. Each piece was secured with some 23 gauge pin nails. Brads or finish nails would work too, but the small holes these pins leave make hiding them later a breeze. The next piece to go in was the side stile. I got the miters nice and tight and set the first pin. Then I used my spacer to ensure that the strip was parallel to the corner. You could go plumb and level, but this keeps things straight to the eye. To complete the rectangle, I start with the opposite style, fastening the top corner and keeping the miter tight. Then the lower rail is fastened at the bottom of the first style, and then that last corner is brought together and fastened to the wall. Finally, a few pins along their length hold the molding in place until the adhesive cures. I used a second spacer to set the first lower rectangle to the correct height from the upper rectangle, while using the first spacer to set the distance from the corner. Then the rest of the assembly was like before. Top rail, side style, and then the other two pieces. And then everything was secured to the wall with a few more pins. All of the outer top rectangles went the same way: spacer, laser, adhesive, and pins. With those complete, I could set the styles for the non-standard frames. I used the same 9-inch spacer to set the distance from the outer frame, and then the laser to set the top of the style. Again, the spacer keeps things visually plumb, and I never checked them with the level. Once all of those styles were set, I could focus on the bottom frames. Since the top of the upper frames were all set, I could reset my laser line to set the height of the lower frames. This let me ditch my height spacer and just use the side spacer. To get the length for the rail, I set the miter on one of my long pieces in place and marked it where the ends meet the opposite style. I took that to the miter saw and cut it to length. Okay, I cut it a bit long. Then it was check the fit, trim as needed, and repeat until I got the fit just right. Once I had the molding the correct length, I used that to check the fit for the other 3 rails for that section. Each one was cut and labeled and fit individually, just to make sure each joint was tight. Theoretically, all 4 pieces should be the same length, but theory and reality are really the same thing. The 4 pieces were nearly identical, but off by just a bit. This ensures I get tight miters and visually straight frames. Once I got the 4 rails cut to size, I added a bead of adhesive, and they were pinned in like before. First one corner, and then the opposite corner, and then a few in between to hold the molding in place. Here you can see how careful layout and spacing set the lower rails of the bottom frames just below the level of the outlets. With all the frames completed, I caulked each miter. A dot of caulk was all that was required, and I made sure to fill any gap while removing all the excess. Once those were done, I switched over to fill the pinholes. While this may not be a necessary step, it does leave a cleaner look, even with those tiny holes. Again, I used as little filler as possible and cleaned up the excess so I wouldn't have to do any sanding. Once the caulk and filler had time to dry, I touched up the paint on the frames, and this job was done. Well, for me anyways. The clients still have to reset their bedroom. I've got about 30 hours invested in this project, and that includes painting the walls, trim, doors, and installing those 20 frames. The molding for those frames ran about $350, and the paint, well, paint prices can vary widely, and we did use a very high-end paint on this project. And in just 1 week, this room was completely transformed. It now just looks classic. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this video. Is there something I could have done differently, easier, smarter? Drop them in the comments below. As usual, I've listed some of the tools and equipment I used during this video below, and there's also a link to my Amazon affiliate store, which lists a lot of the equipment I use on a day-to-day basis. Should you happen to need one of those pieces and buy it through those links, it does help keep this channel going. If you enjoyed this video, maybe give us a thumbs up and share it with friends. And if you haven't already, maybe it's time to hit that subscribe button and a little bell so you get notified each time I put out a new video. As always, I don't have a clue what's coming up next, but it should be something interesting. Until then, have a great day, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.